We good to go?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
There.
All right, everyone.
We're good.
Hi, I'm Kadi McKean. I'm the community manager here at Reversing Labs. And today we're doing a pop-up live. Whether you're listening in on LinkedIn, X, or on YouTube, we're happy to have you with us. Today, it's all about open source and how it's the foundation of modern software, and trust in the software supply chain has never been more challenged. So this is a really important topic. I talk about it a lot in different community meetups and on the conference circuit, but with me today, I have two great guests who know way more about this than me that I'm happy to talk to today. So with me, without further ado, is board director Doug Levin. Hi.
Hi.
And we have director of editorial and content from Reversing Labs, Paul Roberts. Morning.
Welcome.
Both of which are tuning in from Massachusetts. So before we get into it, I'd love to learn a little bit more about just who you are, why you're interested in this topic, why it matters to you, and then we'll dive into the questions. So Doug, let's start with you.
Okay, so I guess I'm the OG on the panel by merit of just being around for a while. But so back in the day, internet period, I ran two companies, 98, 99, where the developers were taking a huge amount of open source software and integrating it into our applications that we're bringing into market. And that led to the idea of building an administrative kind of platform that would interrogate source code and then subsequently binaries and all kinds of components and artifacts, and find out the license solution first and foremost, whether or not it's right and it's properly done, and secondly, security related solutions. I mean, that came along later in 2007, but what's important to know is that back in the day, I was involved deeply with open source as both a way of building software as a way, but also as a licensed entity in the SDLC, and then separately as a security issue.
We're lucky to have you here on today just because you've seen that evolution and going through the another shift we're going through right now. So there's a breadth and depth to the knowledge that you're going to be able to provide to this conversation today, and just what you've seen and continue to observe. So thanks for being here. Paul, what about you? What brings you to, the software supply chain conversation today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have been writing about cybersecurity for more than 20 years, around 25 years, and seen the kind of evolution of the cyber threat landscape. The software supply chain stuff really came to a head going way back. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, you started to sort of see examples of software supply chain attack. Definitely when I came on board here at Reversing Labs back in 2021, immediate aftermath of SolarWinds, it really started to, focus my attention on just the kind of breadth and complexity of the software supply chain security problem. And I think this is, in some ways, this speaks to some of the core issues that have challenged the software industry over the last 2 decades around things like software quality and risk. And in some ways, this is just like a really fundamental issue that needs to be addressed and resolved. So somebody who's spent most of his career writing about cybersecurity, it's been very rewarding.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation today. So like I said earlier, today is all about how trust in the software supply chain has never been more challenged. We're going to talk about why this matters now, how that risk has evolved beyond traditional security checks, and why developers, maintainers, really AppSec teams too, need better community-centered support. So Doug, I'd like to start with you today. You have a very active Substack blog that I love reading because it runs the gamut, right? And it talks about startup life, open source. You just run the gamut of a variety of different topics that I love. And you said in one of your Substacks that trust in the software supply chain has eroded. And I want to dig into why you said that and kind of what has changed.
Well, I've had the benefit of more than 2 decades of watching this. And, back in the day, the original LAMP stack, which was Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP or Python. Python was young then, or just introduced, but PHP was around. And it was the LAMP stack provided kind of a very kind of condensed, manageable kind of frame of reference for open source and in a sense, the components that were developed for the supply chain, the software supply chain, as well as just software development in general. I mean, when you have something like singularly like Apache to be able to do all the various things that the various Apache projects did then and eventually does today, it's I think 20, 30 different projects under Apache. It was manageable and it was kind of condensed in many respects. Over the last 2 decades, however, the central concern about vulnerable code has gone beyond the CVE kind of frame of reference. And now we've got all manner of code which have vulnerabilities or exploits or hidden all kinds of bizarre hidden code and multi-layer kind of exploits which are possible. Back in the day, a DDoS attack was a tsunami. Today, it's like there are literally 20 to 30 things that are on the mind of CISOs and SOC members, SOC staff, about what to fix and what to exploit and what problem to address. So what's happened is that what I was referencing in that blog post was in many respects a function of time, so that's point number one, that things have changed over a period of time and it's not as manageable. Secondly, there is a myriad of things you have to keep in mind on the code level, not to mention the fact, and I forgot to mention all the open source in AI models in conjunction with software that's being built and also infrastructure. And the final piece is all this exotic kind of vulnerabilities which are developed partially as a result of AI, but also partially because of just the ability to compound vulnerabilities and make things stagger over a period of time and create problems in new ways.
I think, it's curious with your, like you said, 2 decades of experience. What do you think has been the biggest shift that you've seen from like your early Black Duck days, in today's supply chain threat landscape? Because as you said, like DDoS was like a big tsunami type event, whereas, then we saw, probably up to 10 years ago, maybe 5, like CVEs were the big thing. And now we're seeing even more attack vectors due to LLMs. Then you have things like MCP servers and even really like in developer tools and stuff. So, there's a lot to choose from for this question, but what would you say is the biggest shift you've seen?
Well, I was in diapers when I created Black Duck in 2002. So let me try to go back and remember all this. But, truthfully, back in the day, the largest concern was license compliance. Mm-hmm. And the reason why was the software authority, the people in the open source community were suing other, companies, all kinds of companies, large companies and even medium-sized and small companies. Lawyers were very active in the open source space, to the point where you literally need lawyers to review not only the licenses that were in place, like Berkeley and BSD and the MIT license, and especially GPL 3.0 and 3.5 and all the other releases, but also lawyers had to review the licenses that were offered by commercial vendors. And mixing those two were a complicated kind of sandwich where, it was like a bagel and a flat piece of bread. They kind of didn't fit in the sandwich. Anyway, that was back in 2002. Well, actually, even before that, 1998 all the way through, let's call it 2005 and 2007. And then all of a sudden, the world, and this is largely, the five bad actors like the state actors, plus a lot of criminal organizations, discovered open source was a great route for creating vulnerabilities, creating bad acting software, creating all kinds of, just bad shit. Back then, from 2007 onward. And then once that level of consciousness occurred in that period, then from that point on, it was a malware party, where all kinds of people, like especially hacking organizations, there was one in Amsterdam, for instance, that just went crazy for a period of time in, like, I want to say 2008 through 2011. And remember, I was still in diapers, so I may have been off by a year or so in remembering this. But here's what's important. Today, we've got a mixture of all kinds of code inside organizations that is being developed that is for commercial purposes, but also for internal use purposes. And we've got all kinds of infrastructure that's available on the way. I mean, when you think about the multiple rags, you also think about the multiple tools. I mean, we've got, PyTorch and TensorFlow and Hugging Face transformers on the open source AI side that's working in conjunction with all kinds of open source projects, as well as models and orchestration. When orchestration occurs, we are putting together all kinds of heterogeneous components, artifacts, and functionalities. And within there are potential vulnerabilities that can be seeded or embedded. And, that is what makes the software supply chain so complex today and challenging to get this right. So my recommendation, of course, is not only use tools which uncover embedded vulnerabilities like ReversingLabs binary and static and dynamic analysis capabilities, but going beyond that, what you also want to do is make sure that your entire SDLC is covered, and you don't think about it as a one-time kind of exam. It's really starting from the beginning and understanding all the components that are going into the the early stages of software development and model development, both simultaneously, because they can be integrated. And then subsequently, what you do is, you do all your testing and release management, but in between, you also run your tests.
Yeah. I think that's really key nowadays. You can't just hit, npm install or pip install and pray. You really do have to inspect each portion of the SDLC nowadays, because again, those are different attack vectors where people are coming in a variety of ways. I mean, Paul, I saw you nodding along. I just wanted to make sure, you were able to say your piece. Did you have anything to add to that? You're mute, Paul.
I know. No, I mean, I really agree with what Doug had to say, and I've kind of seen the same kind of dynamics play out over the past couple decades. And I mean, I do think that this, incidents like Shai Hulud, really kind of make very clear the sort of growing dynamics of these types of risks. But honestly, if you go back even as far as things like the Stuxnet campaign, right? Years ago, some of the same. I mean, that was just kind of canary in the coal mine of what was coming, right? Which was software-based attacks on operational technology systems and physical infrastructure that had really devastating effects. And I think that for me, I mean, I can remember writing about that as a journalist, and that was really shifted the whole conversation in some ways around cyber risk. And I think where we are now, both with, like Doug said, just the dynamism of the software development world and the speed that AI coding agents give to individuals and companies, but also our struggle to kind of understand and grasp the risk around that is another big kind of tectonic shift that we're experiencing. And yeah.
Let me just jump in, and because we're live, and because, let's face it, I can just jump in. It's interesting because historically, it was these canary in the coal mine events. It was these big DDoS attacks. There were these singular malware attacks. Mm-hmm. It's no longer like this. It's a flood of things every single day in all kinds of different. I mean, when you look at Typo Squad and abandoned projects, and you look at all the variety of CVEs that are possible, and not just in the software part and in the infrastructure part, but also beyond that in models. I mean, model data poisoning, for example, and a whole bunch of other things which could lead to additional cybersecurity threats. It is a very different environment. The threats and the vulnerabilities are far broader than back in the day when I was, in breeches, and or in diapers, and it's that's what I find really interesting, and I find that a lot of white papers are not adequately explaining this, and then in a lot of cases on panels that the cybersecurity so-called experts are not reaching back and really drawing a contrast between simple linear events and today the multilinear complex events which are occurring, and that is the big difference. Today you need not just belt and suspenders, but you kind of need a blanket around it to capture everything that's happening in the operating environment.
So is it safe to say that traditional SCA, software composition analysis, is no longer enough on its own?
Correct. It's not enough on its own. First of all, almost every dev shop has to do multiple instances of binary analysis or dynamic analysis. In addition to that, the static analysis is absolutely requisite. So you think of those as belt and suspenders, but then you blanket it and you include also a lot more in the process, both as HITL or humans in the loop, analyzing what's going on a component by component basis, but also using additional tools to analyze the code base and make sure that the code base itself is as free as possible of these CVEs.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. We've talked about the problem at large, kind of the history of it and how things have evolved. But I want to focus on those that are actively developing software. So developers, maintainers, and I want to get a better understanding of what makes it so difficult for maintainers and developers to trust software right now. Why has that become so hard?
Number one, scale. Absolutely, number one, scale. It's we're talking about thousands of transitive dependencies, and no human can meaningfully review them. You need a lot of tools to keep on top of that. I would say, secondly, identity, especially recently with agents, has totally freaked out people because they didn't, agents are identities. People have to come to understand that they become an identity and that agents acting on other agents is a reality. This McKinsey hack that occurred, what was it, a month ago?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to go into it because, I've got friends in McKinsey. But the important point is that was a massive attack. And it was an agent acting on an agent application. You have to track those. Model to model hacking is going to be a reality, and multidimensional model to model hacking is going to also be a reality. People have to start dimensionalizing the problem, and so that's a scale issue plus an identity problem, and they're not separate. And then you get all these, like the maintainers are unpaid volunteers. They have to, they have to be incentivized. I mean, we have to find a way of incentivizing these people. We've got to create kind of an economy by which they can be, or back in the day, companies were subsidizing maintainers. I mean, this is back in the LAMP stack days, where literally contributors to the Linux stack were subsidized by large companies who were the 26 company consortium who were monetarily supporting these people, not just Red Hat and IBM back then, but today it would be the OpenAIs and the Anthropics and everybody else in the ecosystem have to throw in and then the final thing is this AI generated code and AI suggested dependencies. We are in a whole new world of sloppy code and code dependencies. And I mean, this is a new world where LLMs can generate tons and tons of code, and some of it is just simply shitty. And some of it is rife with bad acting code in it. Yeah. And we can easily be slipped in by outside parties. So we have to change sum it up. We have to change the dimensions and the quality as well as the incentives behind all this code generation and software development.
Yeah. Paul, I saw you nodding along. I know there's something burning in your tongue.
Well, I mean, it's very timely what Doug says, because actually ReversingLabs just today published some research on Vladimir Pezo, one of our researchers, on a malicious dependency linked to North Korean state actors targeting a cryptocurrency platform and the attack was basically getting Claude AI to introduce this malicious dependency into the application, right? And this is not a new attack. It's something we've been tracking for months in terms of the actual malware. What's new is them figuring out how to, get Claude to actually use that dependency, which, use typo squatting and other stuff, not unusual tactics. But also figuring out, how to get it to pull that into the application. A lot of the conversation around AI security has focused on, well, AI is so amazing at finding vulnerabilities and exploitable vulnerabilities, and look, it found thousands of them, and it's just like absolutely an issue. And there are already thousands of exploitable vulnerabilities that attackers have to choose from. So now that there are 10,000, does that actually really change the threat landscape? Maybe not. But this type of thing, right, being able to poison learning models, being able to, trick coding agents who are generating hundreds or thousands of lines of code to introduce, maybe 1 out of 1,000 dependencies is malicious. Really hard for development teams to, without the right tooling, to be able to zero in on that particular threat and risk. So, it is the threat landscape and the defense landscape, of course, are changing so quickly.
I think this is why, though, it always shocks me, and you both have mentioned, hints of this, but you can be the poorest country on the planet, right? All you need is a little bit of internet, and like you can go wild, and that becomes your economy, as like North Korea has proven.
Yeah.
So, you know, we built these LLMs, we taught them to think, and now attackers are really teaching them how to attack in different variety formats. So, you know, we've all talked about it. There's different parts of the SDLC we have to focus on. We've evolved beyond CVEs. It's really more of an identity problem now and trust. You know, what are different real risk signals that, you know, development teams and AppSec teams should be looking at beyond these vulnerabilities for today to make sure that they are okay? Because again, it could be a variety of things, and it's not just a linear thing like Doug mentioned earlier. It's multiple things at the same time. So kind of how do you corral that into a palatable consumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at some of the campaigns that we've reported on, you know, definitely developers need to be much more attentive to what they're bringing into their code, because we've seen malicious campaigns where the actors are taking a lot of time and effort to, you know, up the number of, you know, followers to a package, the number of downloads, the number of versions, making it, you know, checking off all the boxes to make a malicious package look legitimate and established. And that, you know, that pushes the responsibility to the developer to be like, oh, look, all these versions dropped in the last 10 hours. Like, so this is probably bogus. And like Doug said, kind of drop that inherited, like, oh, yeah, this stuff is all good, you know, and oh, this has got 30 different versions, it's definitely good, you know, or you know. So I think it's just a mindset shift. But I agree with Doug also. Part of it is, you know, funding and support for, you know, the work of whether it's open source or commercial software development, you know, really needs to be a priority to get the right outcomes.
So I've been using this expression recently, which is question everything. And so, I mean, this is an interesting transition also, because the developer, you know, in the, you know, from during the internet period and subsequent period with SaaS and up until recently, developers were kind of really fixated on just delivering code, and along the way doing as much as possible to be conforming with license requirements, but that's a tiny fraction, and also with security threats and administrative issues. The administration has more or less gotten super easy today. The license components are much easier today because there's just so much more information, and the lawyers are much better educated. Mm-hmm. What we have is now attendance to details, which a developer on the security side, that just are simply necessary, and that's in a sense where one of the places where developers' jobs have changed. They have to be more attended to cadence, release cadence anomalies, as Paul described, you know, like multiple instances of a release, unusual network activity, typo squat similarities to popular, packages out there. They have to be aware of declining test coverage in their environment. So be kind of, this reminds me of what quarterbacks do on their blind side. They don't see this issue coming, or a 350-pound defensive end, but it's coming and it's going to hit you hard.
Yeah.
These are new skills that developers simply have to develop in this new age of, scaled vulnerabilities. I think it's interesting that the nature of the artifact has changed. It just requires more attention, and it requires a changed mindset.
Yeah.
And I think as development organizations too, you need to really be thoughtful about your own supply chain. And one thing I've noticed in some of the research that we've written up is a really clear pattern is malicious actors will look for widely distributed, widely used open source packages that are aging, that have not been updated in 5 or 6 or 7 years, but are still used by millions of downloads a week. And they will target those with typo squatting attacks because they know that developers are like, oh, hey, look, there's a new update for this. That's awesome. Yeah. Pull it in. We haven't seen an update in years. Yeah, it's a malicious update. It's like, it's not the real package. And it's almost like as a development organization, like looking through and being like, these are packages we're using that haven't been updated in 5 or 6 years. There's code rot, so that's an issue. But these are also maybe more likely to be targeted by some kind of a typo squatted package or a malicious campaign. So it's just like that type of thinking as well.
I think what I like too is, there's tons of open source tools in the industry, like people have different ones. And I think it's so important that we're seeing, like us, giving away to these developers and maintainers, enterprise grade software where it can help you get started to make sure you're secure. Because as we all know, we run on these open source packages, whether they're big, small, whatever, in between, right? It's probably some guy, maybe like Bob in Nebraska, like that XKCD. Because not everybody can afford to hire a maintainer for their full-time job to be that. I know like the big companies do, but that's not the norm, right? So there has to be a way to help these guys. And I know one way that we can here at Reversing Labs is just giving them, our Spectre Assure offering totally free at cost because we want them to be secure. And it's not just looking at CVEs. You have to look at things like malware, like Doug said, but it's also things like, hey, is there tampering in this version? What's the diff? Is secrets being leaked? Paul, to your point earlier about Shai-Hulud, where those are, self-ecosystem worms that are literally just trying to get a pile of secrets and waiting for when they feel like launching that bomb. Because secrets are, one of your best proprietary things nowadays. It kind of gives you the keys literally to the kingdom that you're in. And we've seen a few of these in the past year. So I think there needs to be more programs like that, where we are seeing community kind of not raising the alarm, but being the army to support these folks who are making these components that are just so detrimental to the open source ecosystem.
Well, the way I look at it is, the time to the mile was broken 160 years ago. I don't even know, in the 60s probably. Yeah. And now we've got marathoners who are breaking 2 hours.
2 hours, man.
I mean, it is absolutely amazing.
Too. It's just even a fast course, but anyway.
Well, the reason why I raise this issue is because, things are getting faster and faster. That's for sure. The scale is getting bigger and bigger. And software developers are capable of evolution. And they just have to change their attitudes toward providence. They have to expand the risk signals that they are tracking. They have to be much more aware of, being left-handed and right-handed. Software developers as well as AI developers, all at the same time. Now, it's challenging. I'm not suggesting for a moment this is like a cakewalk. What I'm suggesting, though, is that our times just demand an evolution in the way software development is being developed, as well as how software developers view software development.
Yeah. It's definitely a renaissance time where we're reinventing. But I know we're about at time. For those of you who stayed on with us, thank you so much. Doug, what are your final thoughts or key takeaways or the one mindset shift that you would like people to walk away from this conversation today?
The big catch-all question. Well, first of all, I would suggest everyone go out and think about this. Sit someplace and think about this, because I don't think we're going through a renaissance. A renaissance is very slow. I think we are going through a
Dark
a
Ages?
lightning. Sorry.
Dark Ages?
No, we are going through a light age. Everything is out in the light. I mean, but the scale is immense. I mean, it is simply different. So that what people should come away from is this is not a simple scanning problem. Back in the day, I helped invent scanning of source code and binaries. It's no longer that. It's a sourcing problem in a very real sense, and it's a much bigger problem of identifying everything along the SDLC and vetting it all out. So it's much more demanding. And that's why, occasionally taking a little break and grabbing a yogurt or an ice cream, that's a good idea.
I like that. I think I'm going to use light age more now because, when I say Renaissance, I wasn't thinking about the actual time span it was. I was just thinking of like the evolution of art and things like that, where just a lot happened. But I like that analogy of slow down, take a minute, maybe an ice cream, but also the light age. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I'm with Doug. I mean, I think that the real change here is scale more than the nature of the issues that we're dealing with, and the scale works both ways. I mean, I think in some ways what we're going to see is yes, AI is empowering both attackers and defenders. The scale is absolutely going to change. Does the actual outcomes really change that much from what we've seen? I don't know. I mean, I do feel like, things like Spectra Assure Community are a way to kind of, democratize some of the types of intelligence that developers and development organizations need to make smart decisions. Like we're all talking about, well, they need to pay more attention to these software supply chains. It's very hard to do that without the intelligence and the information you need to make informed decisions. So I do think that that's super important, and obviously RL is on that problem. And then I think listen, I do think that there's an increasing amount of, like Doug said, obviously skepticism about software supply chain quality and integrity, and I do think that that is probably going to generate changes, whether those are, as we saw from J.P. Morgan Chase's CISO, coming from the consumers, the consumers of that technology, or whether it's coming from governments and regulators, just around raising the bar and kind of creating hard requirements around some of these security standards. And so I do think it's going to be a very interesting, next 5 or 10 years as we see that evolve.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive, that's for sure.
For sure.
Well, Doug, Paul, thank you so much. I know we went a bit over today, but I just couldn't stop the rhythm of the conversation. It was just too good. So for those of you at home, if this was great today, please share this link. We'll have it on Reversing Labs, our LinkedIn page and YouTube, but please share this if you found it insightful. Till next pop-up, I'm Kadi McKean.
Bye. Thanks, Katie. Thanks,
Bye.
Doug.